Welcome to Burn the Rules with Chet Hirani. This podcast is for people who know leadership isn't about titles, noise, or ticking boxes. It's about how you think, how you show up, and how you perform when pressure is real. I'm Chet Hirani, and I work with leaders and high performers across business, sport, and life all over the world who want to take control of how they lead and perform. Not by copying someone else's rules, but by understanding themselves first. Every conversation here is grounded in experience, reflection, and practical insight. So if you're ready to question what leadership has been taught to be and decide what it means for you, you're in the right place. I'm going to say something that a lot of corporate leaders are thinking, but none of them will say publicly. The return to office debate has nothing to do with culture, nothing to do with collaboration, and nothing to do with productivity. It has everything to do with control. And the leaders mandating it, most of them can't articulate why. Beyond, we need people back in the building. Look, that's not strategy. That's nostalgia dressed up as leadership. But here's the part the remote work crowd don't want to hear either. Working from home isn't automatically better. Plenty of people are still hiding behind a laptop screen or doing less, connecting less and growing less. They're not thriving remotely. They're coasting, and they're using flexibility as a shield against accountability. So both sides are lying to themselves here. And the entire debate is a distraction from the real question nobody's asking. Can your leaders actually lead regardless of where people sit? And that's what we're talking about today. Today's episode is called The Office Debate is a Distraction, and Your Leaders Know It. Look, so far I've been challenging everything that's broken about modern leadership. We've covered the old rules, fear, judgment, busyness, your team breaking underneath you. And now we're here today with the biggest smokescreen in corporate life right now, the where you work debate. And I promise you, by the end of this episode, you'll never see it the same way again. Let me tell you what's actually happening behind the return to office mandates, because it's not what the press releases say. When a company says we need people in the office for culture and collaboration, what they're really saying is our leaders don't know how to lead people they can't see. That's the truth nobody will admit, because admitting it means admitting that your leadership model was always built on proximity, not trust. It was built on line of sight, on being able to walk past someone's desk and see at their screens, on the illusion that physical presence equals productivity. I saw this for 20 odd years in corporate. The leaders who needed everyone in the office weren't the ones with the strongest teams. They were the ones with the weakest leadership skills. They couldn't measure output. They couldn't set clear expectations. They couldn't trust. So they defaulted to surveillance. And they called it collaboration. When I was roughly about 29, working in finance in London, my manager reviewed every single email before I could send it. That wasn't about quality, it was about control. The office debate is the same instinct, just scaled up to an entire organization. And we need you where we can see you is effectively what they're trying to say. A corporate polished version of we don't trust you. Now, before the remote work advocates start cheering, just sit down. Because you've got problems too. The narrative that remote work is automatically better, more productive, more flexible, more human is only half true. For some people, remote working is liberating. They're more focused, more creative, more in control of their time. But for others, it's a hiding place. I've coached leaders who have had team members they haven't had a meaningful conversation with in months with. Not because they're in different time zones, because everyone's on camera for scheduled calls and invisible for the rest of the time. Slack messages have been replaced by real connections. Status updates have replaced honest check-ins. And nobody's asking, are you actually okay? Are you growing? Are you engaged? Or are you just online? Because online is not the same as present. And the green dot on Slack doesn't mean someone's doing their best work. It just means their laptop's open. When I was building NYOC from scratch, working from home, I learned this the hard way. There were days when I was technically working 12 hours but achieving nothing. because nobody was watching, nobody was challenging me, and nobody was actually pulling me out of that drift. Remote work without discipline, without structure, without intentional connection is just isolation with a Wi-Fi password. So, no, remote work isn't the answer either. The answer is something neither camp wants to talk about because it's harder and it requires leaders to actually lead. Here's the question that cuts through all of this. And it's the question I've asked every executive I've worked with who's wrestling with this debate. Can your leaders lead without line of sight? Because if the answer is no, if your leaders need to physically see their team to know what's happening, to maintain standards, to keep people accountable, then you don't have a location problem, you have a leadership problem. And moving everyone back into a building won't fix it, it will just hide it. Let me give you an example. Roughly about in 2012, I was working for one of the largest e-commerce projects in the world. Massive teams, multiple locations, and complex delivery. And I learned something that changed how I lead. The teams that performed best weren't the ones sitting closest to me. They were the ones I'd invested in most. Clear expectations, regular check-ins, autonomy with accountability. They didn't need me watching over their shoulder. They needed to know I trusted them. And when they had that trust, they just delivered. The teams that struggled, they were the ones I'd given tasks to without context, without connection, without checking in on the human being behind the deliverable. So location was irrelevant. Leadership quality was everything. And that's the conversation companies should be having today. Not where should people sit, but can our leaders build trust regardless of where people sit? If the answer is no, that's the problem to solve, not the floor plan. So if location isn't the variable, what is? Let me give you 3 things I've seen make or break teams regardless of whether they're in the office, at home, or spread across 5 countries. Number 1, clarity of expectations. Most teams don't fail because they're in the wrong building. They fail because nobody's told them what good looks like. Expectations are vague, roles are blurred, priorities shift without explanation, and people fill the gap with assumptions. I've worked with leaders who've brought their entire team back to their office and nothing changed. Same confusion, same missed targets, same disengagement, because the problem was never proximity, it was ambiguity. If your team doesn't know exactly what's expected, exactly what success looks like, and exactly how they'll be measured, it doesn't matter if they're sitting 3 desks away from you, they're still lost. Number 2, the quality of connection, not the quantity, not the frequency of meetings, the quality. A 15-minute one-on-one where you can actually listen, where you ask about the person, not just the project, is worth more than 10 hours of shared office space. I've learned this in so many organizations. I was so consumed with growth and targets that I forgot to acknowledge the team making it happen. When I started practicing daily gratitude, 1 honest acknowledgement per day, shared with whoever earned it, the culture actually shifted. People felt seen. Connection doesn't require a postcode either. It requires intention. Number 3, trust is the operating system. Not trust as the nice to have. Trust is the foundational infrastructure of how your team works. If trust exists, people deliver, whether they're in London, Dubai, or on their kitchen table. If trust doesn't exist, no amount of hot desking and team lunches will serve you. The leaders I work with who get this right have teams that outperform regardless of location. The ones who don't are actually the ones filling everyone back into the office and wondering why nothing improved. So here's where I land this on you today. And it's a position that will upset both sides equally, which usually means it's the right one. The office debate is a distraction. It's a distraction from the fact that most organizations have a leadership quality problem, not a location problem. And until you fix that, it doesn't matter where anyone sits. So if you're a leader mandating return to office, ask yourself one honest question. Is this about your team's performance or about your comfort? Because if your team was delivering remotely and you're pulling them back anyway, you're not solving a problem, you're creating one. And your best people, the ones with options, will leave. Not because they're lazy, but because they've lost trust in your judgment. If you're working remotely and coasting, own it. Flexibility is a privilege, not a right. And if you're using it to do less, connect less, and hide behind a screen, you're proving the RTO crowd right. Show up with the same intensity remotely that you would in person, because the leaders watching are making decisions about your future based on what they see. And right now, some of them aren't seeing much. And number 3, whether you lead in person, remote or hybrid, invest in the 3 things that actually matter: clarity, connection, and trust. Build those, and the where becomes irrelevant. Ignore them, and no office redesign on the planet will save your culture. Every single one of those episodes comes back to the same place that I've been talking about: leading from within. Not from a notebook, not from a building, not from a dashboard. From you, your clarity, your courage, your willingness to be honest about working and what's working and what's not. See, look, that's what the 5 states of optimization are actually built on: planning, productivity, people, prospect, and performance. And none of this is theory, it's all lived experience as a framework for leaders who are done following someone else's playbook and ready to write their own. So what I want you to do is send this to someone who needs it. If you want to go deeper, grab a copy of my book, Burn the Rules, Lead from Within. But until then, as usual, I'm Chet Hirani, and this is Burn the Rules, and I'll see you on the next one. Before you go, take a moment to think about what stayed with you from this conversation. Not what sounded impressive, but what challenged how you think, decide, or lead. See, leadership isn't something you wait for. It's something you practice internally, daily, and deliberately. And remember this: you can't lead a life that matters by following rules that don't. If this episode gave you perspective, share it with someone who's ready to take more control of how they lead and perform. And subscribe wherever you listen, and keep redefining leadership on your own terms.